Hey everybody, my name is Steve from Snowbeast Performance. I'm a physical therapist, and today we're going to go through a breathing workshop and talk about the benefits that we can get from good nasal breathing habits and how we can use that to help our workout and to help us get stress relief, help us cleanse our system, calm our nervous system, and help us just have better health overall. So first we're going to talk about some anatomy and what goes on when we breathe. Then we will go through a breathing exercise to help you learn how to get full expansion and full capacity of your breathing. We'll talk about a couple of the ways that you can use it during your training and some other ideas that you can utilize once we learn how to breathe better. So to get started, when we breathe, our primary muscle of inspiration is our lungs, right? So we bring air into our lungs, and then as oxygen gets into our lungs, it crosses through a membrane deep into our lungs, and it goes into our blood, and then our blood brings it throughout our system, and it delivers oxygen to our muscles and to our organs. And in exchange, what happens is our organs and our muscles that have used oxygen have carbon dioxide, which it puts back into the blood, and the blood brings it back up to the lungs, and then it crosses through that membrane and gets put out into the air in our lungs, and then we get rid of that carbon dioxide by exhaling. So that's essentially what happens in our lungs. Now, to drive those lungs, what happens is our diaphragm is our respiratory muscle. And our diaphragm is a parachute-shaped muscle, so it kind of sits like a dome, and it sits right underneath the bottom of our rib cage. And when that muscle contracts, it actually presses down, and then it compresses our abdominal contents, and then as it relaxes, it recoils back into that dome shape. So that diaphragm kind of acts as a barrier between our heart and lungs in our rib cage, and then all of our internal organs and everything else below it. It's the first muscle we learn to control, right? When we're born, we learn to breathe before we do anything else. So it's the foundational movement that we have to get good control of our breath before we can build anything else on top of that. So what's unique about the diaphragm is that, one, it's reflexive, but it's also, we have voluntary control over it, right? We can manipulate our breathing. And if we can use our diaphragm more efficiently, it has a lot of great benefits to it. One, it's the most efficient part, right? It's our first muscle. There's a reason why we learn to use it so early, and it's a reason why it has such good endurance. And it cleanses our abdominal contents by compressing things and recoiling, and that's actually a massage for internal organs. And then also, we have a specific nerve. It's one of our cranial nerves, so it comes from our brain all the way down into our gastrointestinal tract. It's called our vagus nerve, and that passes through the diaphragm. So as that diaphragm moves up and down, it strokes and soothes that nerve. And that nerve has an influence of our parasympathetic nervous system. So what it does is, as that nerve gets activated, what it does is soothes our body, and it puts us into our rest and digest. Right? So we have our sympathetic nervous system, which amps us up and gets us ready for fight or flight. And we have our parasympathetic nervous system, which calms everything down. And that's what the vagus nerve does. And it has influences on our throat, it influences our lungs and our heart, and then it influences our gastrointestinal tract. So while it has other functions like sensory and motor functions, the really valuable part of the vagus nerve is that parasympathetic stimulation, that rest and digest property that happens with it. So those are pretty much the main parts of our breathing, right? Our lungs, our diaphragm that drives those lungs, and that nerve that passes through the diaphragm. So when we breathe and that diaphragm compresses down, it cleanses our internal organs and massages them, and it gets them to mobilize the way that they should, and it helps them to have their good nutrition the way that they should. But what's kind of cool about that is, if we think of our core, right, we hear about core a lot, and it's primarily our abdominal musculature in the front, our obliques around the side, and then our back muscles, and that makes a cylinder. Now, if we just had a frame of a cylinder, it's not very stable, and we can easily crush that cylinder. But if we had a base on that cylinder and we had a lid on that cylinder, it would be a lot more stable. Think about a pressurized can, right? When you have a can that's unopened and pressurized, you can put all your weight on it and you won't crush it, right? It's a very sturdy structure. If we open that can, then we can squish it, right? Or if that can is bent and angled at all, right, it's easy to compress that can. But when it's stacked up and pressurized, it's a very stable structure. So if we're looking at the core muscles as our cylinder, right, it works best when we have a base and a lid. And our lid is that diaphragm, and it moves and it compresses up and down. And that base is our pelvic floor. And that pelvic floor is reflexive to our diaphragm. So as the diaphragm compresses down, the pelvic floor reacts too. And that gives our internal organs a nice massage that's going on. And if we had those aligned, that the diaphragm is over the pelvic floor, that gives us our most stable structure. If we were in a position like we were breathing with our chest lifted, right, and we were tipping that lid of that can, that would give us a little bit of a bent can, and that'd be easy to compress that and crush that can. But if we get it stabilized and we have it pressurized, it's a very efficient structure. So we know that by changing the way our diaphragm functions, we can change the way our pelvic floor functions, because our pelvic floor is reflexive to our diaphragm. So we think about things like stress incontinence, which is when you're doing something strenuous and you have a little bit of leakage through your pelvic floor, so that could either be urinary or bowel. If we can stabilize the diaphragm and get that good alignment and reflexive property into that pelvic floor, we can treat that pelvic floor dysfunction. So more often than not, stress incontinence is a pressure management problem. And if we can get better pressure through the system, we can control the pelvic floor and resolve that problem. Also, if we have poor alignment of that core without the lid and the base being parallel, the diaphragm and the pelvic floor being parallel, this is when we need to use excessive use of like weight belts. And I'm not talking about when you're doing max lifts. I'm talking about like an everyday lift when you're doing a regular workout, because you don't have good stability of that core structure. So by changing what's going on with that diaphragm, we can change what's going on with the pelvic floor, and we can change what's going on with the core musculature, and that's going to stabilize your spine and make everything a lot more efficient. So when we breathe, to get that diaphragm to activate, what works really well is breathing through our nose. When we breathe through our nose, we have resistance because our nostrils are small compared to our mouth and our throat. And that resistance makes us have to use our muscles more, so that diaphragm has to contract more and press down, so that way we get a good inspiration. Now there's a few other benefits to that. One, when we breathe through our nose, our nasal passages, they warm, humidify, and clean the air. They filter the air, which is good for anything that's going inside of our lungs. So it gets warmed, humidified, and filtered. It also, as we breathe through our nose and it passes through our sinuses, it creates nitrous oxide. And nitrous oxide is important because it dilates the bronchioles, the deep parts of our lungs, so it opens those up a little bit. And it helps us have a better response to carbon dioxide. And we'll come back to carbon dioxide in a moment. So it's really important that we breathe primarily through our nose. So the idea is our nose is meant for breathing and our mouth is meant for eating. Now, certainly we breathe through our mouth at times. So when we're talking about nasal breathing, we're talking about your resting breath. So when you're just sitting around and not talking a lot, not being strenuous or anything. If you're talking a lot, you're going to breathe through your mouth. If you're doing strenuous activity, you're going to breathe through your mouth. But you primarily should be breathing through your nose because we want to calm that nervous system down. We want to get that cleansing action of our internal organs. We want to get that reflexive property of our pelvic floor. And that respiratory muscle, that diaphragm, is our first muscle we learn to use. And we use it anywhere from 17,000 to 29,000 times a day, right? So it's super efficient, whether we use it correctly or not, but we can improve efficiency. And that gives us a lot of opportunity to impact the way we function because we have so much practice with it throughout the day. So we already talked about when we take oxygen in, we exchange that oxygen into our muscles and into our organs, and that exchange includes carbon dioxide coming back into the bloodstream, and we exhale that carbon dioxide. So we also want to not exhale carbon dioxide excessively fast. We want to control that regulation. And if we breathe out through our mouth, we dump a lot of carbon dioxide quickly. And the reason why that's a problem is for that oxygen exchange to happen, for the red blood cells to take oxygen and deliver it to the organs and the muscles that need it, there needs to be carbon dioxide present. If there's not enough carbon dioxide present, the red blood cells will not give up the oxygen. So you might have good oxygen in your system, in your red blood cells, and we can measure that with like a pulse oximeter, that little monitor that you put on your finger, and we're aiming for above 95%. But that doesn't mean the oxygen is getting delivered to the tissues, because if you're excessively mouth breathing, you don't have enough carbon dioxide in your system, and your red blood cells won't give up the oxygen. So oxygen is the most important nutrient that we take in, right? We can survive approximately 3 weeks without eating. We can survive approximately 3 days without water, a little longer, but we can only survive approximately 3 minutes without breathing. Every cellular function needs an excessive amount of oxygen, which is why we take in so much oxygen continuously throughout the day, and we take in more when we're working harder or when we're stressed. So by getting better control of that carbon dioxide release and keeping in our system, it allows us to get better oxygen through our system. By stimulating that vagus nerve and slowing our breathing rate, that gives our lungs a longer duration to make that oxygen and carbon dioxide exchange because the air is staying in there longer. So there's a lot of benefits to learning to breathe through the nose. The resistance, the filtering, the humidifying, the warming, the nitrous oxide that comes through the nose, the longer exchange duration that happens in the bottom of our lungs, the efficiency of the muscle, the cleansing of the internal organs, the reflexive property of the pelvic floor. So we really want to learn how to breathe through our nose efficiently for a lot of reasons: stress management, relaxation, health reasons, and just getting that good oxygen throughout our system. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through a breathing exercise, and during that breathing exercise, we're trying to calm our nervous system a little bit. We're trying to get ready for that rest and digest phase, and we want to have ourselves relax. And then we're also going to use that same breathing pattern to assess our movements, and we'll talk about that, how we can determine positional tolerances and movement tolerances. And then we'll talk about a couple things that can happen that will influence our training and how we can monitor our breathing, and then work on improving our breath during our training, which is going to improve our oxygenation and improve our overall performance. So how does poor breathing present? First of all, when we're not getting into that rest and digest by stimulating that vagus nerve, is we're staying in chronic fight or flight mode, which means we're constantly stimulated, we're constantly reactive to everything, we're agitated and irritated. So that's appropriate at times, but we don't want to live like that throughout our whole lives. When we're not breathing well through our nose, and we're not breathing appropriately, we also get poor sleep, right? And that can present as snoring, that can present as sleep apnea, and that can just present as just lack of sleep. So sleep apnea is when people skip breaths or miss breaths during their sleep cycle. Now, if you're not getting good sleep and you're chronically in this agitated fight or flight state, you're going to get tired, right? That's going to present as fatigue, and that's going to affect your mental clarity. It's going to affect your physical performance. It's going to affect your ability to recover, right? So we can get all this rest and digest, which is really a recovery type activity. We can get that stimulated. We can have better health and better outcomes. Also, things that can happen with poor breathing is we'll see poor posture, right? If we don't have that diaphragm and that pelvic floor aligned and reacting together, that's going to affect our posture. It can contribute to mouth breathing, which contributes to bad breath. And it can contribute to actually facial changes, because that vagus nerve does have some sensory and motor input into our face. So you can actually have an appearance change if you're not breathing well and you're not stimulating that vagus nerve efficiently. So we're going to start with our breathing exercise, and this part we're going to kind of slow down and relax a little bit. And I encourage you to get into a comfortable position. Most people will find that laying on their backs with their knees bent is the best position to work in, but this can be done in any position. I'm going to be laying on the floor. If you need to lay on a bed, that's fine. Lay on your side, standing, sitting, it doesn't matter. Just get in position and start working on our breath. So I'm going to get laying down on my back with my knees bent, which is a nice relaxed position for me. And what I want to do is I'm going to have one hand on my chest and one hand on my belly. And at first, I'm just going to take nice, long, slow, if I can, breaths through my nose, both in and out. And I want to observe what part of my chest or my belly rises and falls. Where does my breath go? So we're going to take 3 breaths right there, in and out through our nose. Now, if you find that you're primarily rising in your chest, that's okay. We're just making an observation. We're going to try to change it. As we breathe slowly through our nose, what we want is our diaphragm is going to compress down, And that compression of our internal organs is going to make our belly expand forward and to the sides. I'm not trying to push my belly out. I'm letting my diaphragm do it. Okay? So as I do that for a few breaths and we practice that and we try to breathe into our belly, we're going to start to get a little calming of our nervous system. So we want to expand that a little bit. That is a breathing exercise in itself, and you can use that for relaxation and do nothing else. But let's work on using this to get better breath capacity, and then we'll talk about how we use that to assess our movement. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to make a fist with both hands, and I'm going to put up my thumbs and my pinkies. And so I can have the shape going on in my hands. And I'm going to use my thumb and my pinky along the sides of my rib cage, and I'm just using them as, as sensors to feel what's going on. And I'm going to continue to breathe in and out through my nose. My belly will inflate slightly first, and then I want to work on expanding my rib cage laterally out to the sides. So we're going to do 3 breaths like that through our nose, in and out. Now continue to work on that breath as we talk through the next stage. You should feel that as you go through that breathing, you're getting better lateral excursion and expansion of your rib cage because we're bringing attention to it. Again, we're not trying to push our ribs out. We're trying to let a nice big breath push it from the inside out. Okay? As our lungs fill up because of our diaphragm contracting down, we're getting bigger volume into our lungs. The next step, we're going to build upon this. We're going to breathe into our belly, followed by laterally for our ribs. And then we're going to take one hand and we're going to put it back at our chest. And we want to now let our chest rise as we do that breath. So we're going to do 3 breaths, same thing. All the steps kind of happen at the same time. There's a slight delay in the sequence. But if you can't tell when one is starting, the other one's stopping, that's okay. We're just bringing attention to each of those motions. So we're going to do 3 breaths through our nose, into our belly, laterally into our ribs, and into our chest. And continue to breathe in that slow nasal breathing of that big expansion of your rib cage. The last part we want to layer onto this. Same sequence. Belly first, laterally into the ribs, then into the chest, and then we want to think about our lower ribs pushing down into the floor, or perhaps back into a chair, or however you're positioned. So we want to expand our rib cage both forward and backwards. Okay? We're going to do 3 long breaths right there. Continue that breathing pattern as you're resting. Now we spent a few minutes working on this breathing and bringing attention to our diaphragm by breathing through our nose and having that resistance. We were inflating into our belly as our diaphragm pushed down and expanded our abdominal contents outward. We brought attention to our rib cage to expand it laterally, up towards the chest, and then into the low back. You should notice that as you've done this, that your nervous system has calmed down. You should have a better breathing volume. You should have a little relaxation, We've stimulated that vagus nerve, so you're into some rest and digest right now. And this is a good way to calm our nervous system. So you can do this at any time that you're feeling a stress, right? Where you take a few breaths, and as you do it more, you'll get better at getting into this deep breath faster. But what I recommend that you do is that you practice this every night. So when you get into bed, spend 5 minutes laying down, going through this breathing pattern, and setting yourself up for a good night's sleep, because it's going to calm your nervous system. It's going to get you into this breathing pattern that is driven by your diaphragm, which will help you throughout the night get more rest, more recovery, more oxygenation throughout your system, and help you to feel better tomorrow. And that will compound over time as you do it more and more. This will also carry over to our day-to-day life, right? As we learn to breathe more through our nose and less through our mouth. Like we said, sometimes you're going to breathe through your mouth, and that's okay. We're talking about your resting breathing level. So we're talking about when you're not doing anything, you should breathe exclusively through your nose if you can. So that breathing that we just did, we also want to take appreciation of that full reference breath volume. As we did that breathing, we got bigger and bigger breaths. And we're calling that your reference breath volume. So that volume of breath that you can take, you should be able to attain 90% of that breathing volume in any position at any time during the day, even in bad positions. Right? If you're sitting and you're slumped and you're twisted, you should still be able to attain 90% of that breathing. The reason being is our breathing is our first movement. It is the first muscle that activates. It's the first thing we need to do. It's also the first compensation we make. When we don't tolerate a position well, when we don't tolerate a movement well, our breathing reacts. So if we can find a movement or a position that we have difficulty breathing in, and then we can practice the same technique of getting a bigger breath volume up until we get to 90% of our resting on our back breath volume, we're going to tolerate that position better. We're going to own that position. So it could be sitting, it could be standing, right? It could be a simple thing, but it can also be a squat position. It could be a push-up position. It could be an overhead position where you're reaching up, or maybe you're hanging from something that you're grabbing a bar overhead. It could be a twisted position. It doesn't matter what position you're in. You should always be able to get 90% of your reference breath volume at any time. The positions that you don't breathe well in are not going to be a surprise. They're going to be the exercise and the movements that you either don't like or you're not good at. So try that out. Get into a position of a movement that is challenging for you and notice, how is my breathing? You're probably not at that 90%. Work on getting in that position, staying there, and work on expanding that breath volume. Not only will it get better control of your diaphragm, which is a stabilizing function of your core and get oxygen to your system, but it also helps you to learn to expand your rib cage, which is going to give you thoracic mobility. So it's going to help your overall functional movement, as well as giving you better nutrition and oxygenation throughout your system. So you can use that reference breath volume as an assessment of what movements are you good at and what are you not good at, and how can you work on those. The other thing you can work on with nasal breathing is as a training tool. When we're nasal breathing throughout the day, at some point when we are exercising or doing something strenuous, we start to mouth breathe. Now, if we recorded that, if we knew when I did a certain exercise that at this minute or this time I start to mouth breathe, can we measure that, track it, and can we improve it? Can we practice putting off the mouth breathing longer? Can we breathe through our nose longer before we switch to mouth breathing? Right, so we can use that as a training tool of how can we expand the amount of work I can do while continuing to nasal breathe before I have to switch to mouth breathing. We can also use it on the recovery side. When we're done exercising and we're still mouth breathing, how long does it take to get back to nasal breathing? We can record that, track it, and then we can improve it. So we know it takes so long to get back to nasal breathing. Can we shorten that time? Can we get back to nasal breathing faster? Right? The goal after our workout should always be get back to nasal breathing. So when you're done with your exercise or done with whatever your strenuous activity that you're doing, how fast can you get back to breathing through your nose? right? Because that's going to calm your nervous system back down. And the last thing is, can we use nasal breathing as a training session where we only breathe through our nose? That we know that we can do a certain amount of work at a certain intensity for a certain duration just with nasal breathing. And then we can track it, measure it, and improve it by working longer, working harder, more intensity, more resistance, but continue to try to practice breathing through our nose. So we can use nasal breathing for a relaxation method, like we did lying down, to calm our nervous system, to get us ready for rest, to get us ready to calm our nervous system and recover and oxygenate. We can use it to assess our movement position tolerances. So getting into a position that is difficult and trying to get back to that 90% of our reference breath volume. And we can also use it as a training tool of how long does it take me to get, or how long can I maintain nasal breathing, and can I make that longer? How quick do I recover to nasal breathing, and can I make that shorter? Or can I work out and only nasal breathe, and how do I improve that, right? So we can track and measure those things. So those are a couple different ways that we can use nasal breathing, primarily during this time of year when it might be a little stressful. It's been a challenging year. There's a lot going on right now. Take some time to breathe. We do it a lot during the day, right? 17,000 to 29,000 times during the day we breathe. So we can continue to improve that, and that will compound and become better and better over time, besides giving us better nutrition and our calming our nervous system so it can recover. Going forward, we are going to have another breathing workshop. The next one will be towards the end of January, and it's going to be hosted by Casey and Henry from South Burlington Physical Therapy. And they're going to talk about breathing and controlling the physiology so you don't pass the red line too quickly when you're exercising. They're going to talk about breathing in regards to the type of workout, the type of breathing you might want to do. They're going to talk about breathing and how we can use it in relation to movements such as gymnastics or lifting. So they're going to bring some new information that's going to be expanded upon what we're already doing now. So this is a time that you can practice these basic techniques that you can utilize and start working through your mind and working through your body, getting familiar. Because we're going to try to build on that breathing, because we can go through a lot of stuff and we can really build on breathing. There's so many examples of people that learned to breathe better and to report that that was a game changer. That brought them to a new level. That made the world of difference. If you watch any elite athletes during their competition, yes, they might be breathing through their mouth, but when they're on the sideline or they're resting, they pretty quickly get back to nasal breathing. And a lot of times they're nasal breathing even during the competition, right? So we can continue to work on that with a couple simple drills that we can do on our own. So if you have any questions, comments, you can put them in the Facebook group. You can reach out to me or Casey or Henry. Let us know what you guys think, how it's going. Make sure we're clear on what we're working on. And if you have any other suggestions or requests for other topics, please feel free to let us know. We're happy to provide as much as we can. So hope this helps you guys through the holiday season after a tough year. Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, and let me know how it goes. Enjoy your breathing work. Thanks, guys.